Checking, checking, mic checking. Checking, checking, mic checking. Checking, checking, mic checking. Checking, checking, mic 3 checking. Checking, checking, pulpit mic checking. Prelude, welcome and open words mic 3. Chalice lighting and memorial candle. Pulpit mic a little bit closer to me now. Music, bridge over troubled water mic 3. Reading, pulpit mic. Stories of Liz mic 3. Music, Hey Jude. Prayer. At the rising of the sun, mic 3. Pulpit mic, we remember her. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, mic 3. We remember her, pulpit mic. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, mic 3. We remember her, pulpit mic. I think the pulpit mic needs to be higher. No?
Not on the live stream.
Oh, good. Okay.
On the live stream, those are really good.
And we're leaving everything on?
You can turn it off. Good morning. It is so good to see all of you, those of you who have traveled far and near to be with us today, and to those of you who are online with us, watching from wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here. I am the Reverend Emily Bogus, and I want to welcome all of you to Beacon Unitarian Universalist congregation here in Summit, New Jersey. This is the spiritual community for Elizabeth Milliken O'Byrne for almost 40 years. I have the honor of leading this service of memory and of celebration alongside the Reverend Dr. Robin Tanner, my colleague, and my colleague, Dr. Tuli Patel. And we have thanks this morning to Vicki Carter, our pianist, and those of you who don't see Irvin Pei, who is in our robing room, live streaming the service to all of you. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this. Just 2 days ago, May 19th, Liz would have celebrated her 78th birthday, if I get my math correct. And so it seems fitting that we should gather today, so close to her birthday, her family, her friends, her neighbors, her coworkers, here in this sanctuary that she called home. And to all of you, you are with us here in this sanctuary, in this place. Today we gather to mourn the loss of a life that we have loved. Our voices today may be voices of mourning, of grief, but the language of grief, of loss, is grief that gropes. That is the language of love. Did you hear me? The grief that we feel in our hearts is because we have loved. Liz loves us, and we love her. And that love lives beyond her life. And so we center ourselves in that love this day, and we welcome you with the embrace of love.
Each time we gather, we light a chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, the bowl representing the gathered community, the flame representing each one of us individuals. Today we light a second candle, a memorial candle for Liz. As this light burns, may we recall the many gifts that Liz sparked and magnified. May this flame call us close to these gifts and memories kindled in this gathering. May we together illuminate the legacy that we are now called to take up.
Thank you, Tuli. Thank you, Robin. When I was first introduced to Liz way back in 2005, which seems like a blink ago to me, but for some of you might feel far away, we immediately connected over our shared Southern roots. Liz was born in Miami, Florida, to Richard and Ann Milliken. She was the middle child of 3 children, a girl in between 2 boys, her older brother Dick and her younger brother Lindsay. The 3 were teenagers and young adults through the 1960s, and Liz loved the music of that time, which Vicki has woven through today's service. Brian shared in passing to me that he and Liz stopped listening to music composed after 1970. And my colleague Robin said, wasn't Hey Jude made after 1970? It was just on the cusp, composed just on the cusp. However, the 1960s were also a very turbulent time, as we all know. And that turbulence found its way into Liz's family when her older brother Dick, who was serving in Vietnam, was killed. His plane was shot down and his body was never recovered. It was a major loss, and I believe one of those moments where Liz understood that you needed to celebrate life in the moments that you had. There were also other challenges of this time that came to define who she was. She grew up in a time and a place where being a smart girl, a smart woman, was not celebrated. And Liz was smart. In fact, her high school teachers told her that it was a waste of her time and probably theirs to take science classes. Nevertheless, as the saying goes, she persisted. Liz would go on to earn her PhD in biochemistry. When applying to colleges, Liz didn't apply to many schools due to the costs and the restrictions in admissions placed on women. Her top choice was William and Mary, but she didn't get in. It was at that point that the father of one of Liz's friends reached out to her and her family. He knew that Liz was too smart not to go to a good college. He was an alumnus of Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and so he advocated for Liz to attend Emory for summer school and then enter her freshman year in the fall. And she ended up going straight through that summer program and graduating in 3 years at Emory. In fact, it was this experience, both the experience of being told what she shouldn't do and the power of advocates, that caused Liz to become such a strong advocate for girls and women to take their education seriously, to persist no matter what people said, and to invest in their careers, particularly women in science. Liz's life was also graced with good friendships, good and long and deep friendships. You'll hear later from her friend Helen Bowers about the power of their friendship. But I will tell you also that in the week before their freshman year at Emory University, Liz met two people, Sue Ellen Meyer and Patsy Jo, or PJ, Brooks Trebitz, who were randomly assigned as her roommates. And I learned a little bit about this story in the foyer. She wasn't just randomly assigned. They basically didn't have enough room in the dorm for the three of them. And so they put bunk beds in the day room, and the three of them were there in those bunk beds, and they became lifelong best friends. How does that happen? Over 60 years, there, of course, are a lot of stories, a lot of memories from this friendship. They each served as one another's maids of honor at their weddings, and over the years, they lived in a lot of different places. That didn't stop them from seeing one another and visiting one another as much as possible, juggling families and careers and commitments. On visits, they brought their children with them, and so their babies slept in each other's cribs and played alongside one another. Sue Ellen shared one memory with me this week that felt emblematic of Liz's approach to life. After they graduated, Sue Ellen was married and was living in Cincinnati. Liz drove from Indianapolis to spend the weekend with them. So Saturday morning, Sue Ellen was folding towels and trying to do the chores as quickly as possible so that they could go out together. I'm sure you all have had people visit you and you have been frantically trying to get things done so you could get to the good part. So Liz looked at Sue Ellen with her big, understanding eyes. You've all had that experience of Liz looking at you, right? Gently took the towel from Sue Ellen's hands and said, "Let's fold them in thirds long ways, then in half and half again, so they'll be pretty when you open the linen closet. If you have to do the task, make it as beautiful as you can. It won't take any more time, but it will give you pleasure in the doing of it." Sue Ellen wrote to me saying, Liz was absolutely right. I did enjoy returning to the closet and seeing them there. And to this day, Sue Ellen still folds her towels as her friend taught her and feels Liz's presence as she does it. When the three friends retired, they began taking trips together. They met in 14 different places, renting houses, seeing the sights, and spending the evenings in their pajamas, eating cheese and crackers and drinking wine. Patsy Jo, PJ, wrote, "Being with Liz was always a joy, and I loved her with all my heart. I always will." After studying biochemistry and microbiology at Emory, receiving both her Bachelor of Science and a master's degree, Liz went to Indianapolis, where she worked at Eli Lilly, a pharmaceutical company. And after a year, however, she decided there wasn't much for her in Indianapolis. And so she changed companies and started working for Ciba Geigy, a Swiss company, and moved to the metro New York area, which benefited all of us. Liz met Brian at a party. In 1971, the party was hosted by Liz's good friend Michelle from Emory, who was studying at Columbia for her math degree. Brian was an assistant professor with the Columbia math department. Brian said that the party was really loud, and so it was hard to get to know her, so he had to ask her to go out on a date so that he could get to know her better. And then they did, and he found that she was not only very pretty, but she was intelligent and funny. And they enjoyed a lot of the same things: food, travel, theater. In fact, they loved the restaurants around Columbia. In just a few blocks, they could eat seven different cuisines. And so they married in 1972. As Brian was working in Manhattan, it became the center point. And they lived in different places around the rim of that wheel, right? As so many of us do here. Hastings-on-Hudson, Carytown, Westchester, and finally the Millburn Summit area, moving here in 1986. They spent their early years together working and traveling. They honeymooned in the Caribbean. They drove and camped across the northern section of the United States, returning through Canada where Brian had grown up. Liz's favorite food was lobster. She could eat lobster 3 times a day if given the option. And they often visited the lobster territory, traveling up the coast to Maine, even further into Canada. When Liz was pregnant, she and Brian traveled to Israel, and her father encouraged her to get a bottle of water for the christening. Liz had other ideas about how she wanted to raise her children religiously. So she was looking for a religious community grounded in shared values, not requiring their members to all believe or think alike. She valued, as you can imagine, a community that strived for inclusion and diversity, that would have deep partnerships with other religions and other cultures. She found the Unitarian Church in Summit, as we were called then, and quickly made it her home. Liz and Brian's children were born in 1975 and 1985. Sorry to give away your ages, you all, in Westchester. Just after Kenneth's birth, Liz got transferred to the Summit office at Ciba, and they bought a house in Millburn where they lived for 37 years. The O'Byrne family typically ate dinner together. Even if it was takeout, they ate it in the dining room. And if you were drinking wine, you drank out of the Waterford Crystal, okay? If it was warm enough and not raining outside, you ate dinner outside. They preferred eating dinner outside, cooking on the grill. But then you drank wine from the sterling plastic. As a mother, both Lucy and Ken shared how incredibly supportive their mother was. Liz was a working mom. She was also a highly professional person. And so Liz praised her Swiss company for the ways that they centered family and work-life balance. She had the flexibility to be around a lot. She put them both through school financially and pushed them to excel. Ken shared in particular that his mom was clear with them that they shouldn't do what she wanted them to do, but they should cultivate what they loved. Lucy remembered Liz starting a Girl Scout troop because there wasn't one in the area, and because she wanted Lucy to have access to the tools that Girl Scouts taught them and valued. And then Lucy got into curling, of all things, not your standard sport, in the 1990s, and Liz embraced it. She bought a minivan so that she could drive the team all over the Northeast, and Ken, bless his heart, got dragged along. On one particular high school curling trip, they were driving to Schenectady, New York, when their old Chevy Nova died about 30 to 45 minutes from their destination. They pulled over to the side of the highway, and they managed to get a tow truck. However, you know how this goes. The tow truck wants to take you to the service station, not to your destination. But Liz had other things in mind, not this time. Liz insisted that the driver take them directly to the curling club so that the team wouldn't miss their game. Liz dropped them off with their curling gear and their luggage and then sorted out the car on her own. Now, I don't know if Lucy's team won that game. However, I was told by both kids that anything that could be celebrated would be celebrated, and it would be celebrated with Prosecco. I almost brought a bottle of Prosecco to put on the altar for today. In fact, when Lucy got into vet school, Liz sent her a Vermont teddy bear dressed up in a white doctor's coat with Dr. O'Byrne stitched on the name tag. Liz liked to commemorate these life events. She knew how important moments could be, like folding towels, and she wanted the moment to stick out and be honored. It was at this point in her life that Brian turned to Liz, who had long wanted to get her PhD, and said, "Well, you better get your PhD before Lucy gets her doctorate." And so she did. Liz retired early at the age of 60 when SIBA merged to become Novartis, and it allowed her to spend time with those she loved, giving her the flexibility to pick up and go where she was needed, whether it was time and travel with Brian, her kids, now adults, or with her friends. Liz also had a bucket list of the places she wanted to visit, specifically the Serengeti in Africa, which became their favorite trip, and the Galapagos. In the year after Lucy finished her veterinary internship, Liz wanted to celebrate, of course, the completion of a very hard year before Lucy started her first job, so they decided they would go to Scotland. Liz booked everything in advance. However, they didn't discover until they arrived at the airport with all of their luggage and gear that something hadn't gone through when you click confirmation on the website, or however you got plane tickets at that time. So when they got to the desk, they did not have a reservation. Can you imagine? Nevertheless, Liz persisted. She wasn't going to let this trip slip away. And so she asked, "Well, do you have any seats on the flight that we want?" And they did, and they told her how much it would cost, and she said, "Well, book them." And they went. They went to Scotland. Liz's last trip was a big move to Canada, and it was actually her idea. Liz had been campaigning to Lucy and to the family to move to Canada, especially after the 2016 presidential election. Lucy would retort, "But Mom, everyone is here. It's gonna be okay." In fact, in 2017, Lucy and Jeff bought a house in New Jersey, not that far from her parents. But then Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and Liz could foresee the changes that would happen on the Supreme Court. "I really think we should move," she said. She told her family. She feared for her granddaughter, Maeve, and what the future for her granddaughter would be. Liz wanted to live in a country where human rights were upheld. That said, it was also the middle of a pandemic. But the pandemic had nothing on a woman who had called a truck driver and forced him to drop a team of curlers at their destination point. And so they moved. They found the perfect spot in Ottawa where Brian had grown up that allowed them to embrace a multi-generational life, and not far from Ken, just a 6-hour drive. I will be honest, however, it was hard for our community, it was hard for us in the middle of the pandemic to get a phone call saying, "We're moving to Canada." That was hard, especially because we were so isolated from one another that it was hard to say goodbye. There was no celebration the way that Liz would have wanted. And so today, at the end of her life, seems significant. The fact that you all have made this happen, I thank you. We needed it. Thank you for making this happen. This is the way that we are going to lift our glasses and celebrate Liz's life together as she would want. I hope that in the days and the weeks to come, you'll get out your Prosecco and toast her. Or you'll have a glass of wine in a glass of Waterford crystal or sterling plastic, and you will toast the one and only Elizabeth Milliken O'Byrne. I would like to invite Helen Bowers forward, Liz's friend. Here. Yeah. Right there.
I can take this off.
You can take that off.
Feels good. Reverends, Vicky, friends and family of Liz, how do you capture 50 years of sharing love, sharing life, sharing joys and sorrows, sharing family? How do you capture a bond 50 years strong in under 6 minutes? Maybe a snapshot of our relationship at points where we grew and points where we helped each other grow. Liz and I met in 1970 when, proud of our shiny new degrees, we were bench techs at a pharmaceutical company that's now defunct. We were the grunts of the drug company world, but we were oblivious because Liz had Brian and I had David. Liz and I had lunch 5 days a week, and on the weekends we had adventures. A series of adventures involved the four of us teaching ourselves how to cook. On one sub-zero weekend in February, we found some Chinese recipes and took off to Chinatown to buy a wok and Chinese ingredients. We came back to the O'Byrne apartment to make, among other dishes, stir-fried beef. Step 1, heat the oil in the wok to steaming, sizzling, smoking. Step 2, throw in the hot peppers. We did not know you were supposed to use dried hot peppers. And you know what happens when you put fresh hot peppers into sizzling? Brian's going, mmm. Tear gas. White, acrid smoke filled the kitchen, the apartment, our eyes, our throats, our lungs. We opened the windows, didn't help. So we got out of there, and we, in this absolutely sub-zero weather, walked the streets of Hastings, coughing and laughing. And then we went out to dinner. Some of the adventures happened, and some continued through the years of our love. The first Christmas we were married, I was helping Liz trim her tree. And she said to me, "You're Jewish." I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You don't have a tree." I said, "No." And she said, "Well, this is our tree." And from then on, the O'Byrne Bowers tree was a thread that wove one year to the next. Every Saturday or Sunday before Christmas, we would take out the box of ornaments, and Liz and I would take each one out very lovingly and share the story of each ornament. This is the one Lucy made in kindergarten. This is the one that Mom sent me when Ken was born. These are the pine cones you and Rachel decorated. This is the one we got when we were all in Ireland. This is the one from Mystic. Our kids used to call this the afternoon of the soggy rug. Lucy was the first kid to come around. She belonged to all four of us, and she still owes me for the afternoon that she and I sat in her room and played the music from Annie over and over. Liz and Brian, Dave and me all four of us live in the state of I love Lucy. We wanted more Lucys, but it was not to be. Separately, Liz and I both went into infertility treatments. And for those of you who are not fortunate enough to know what it's like to be in infertility, I can tell you, it's 4 to 5 visits to the doctor every month. It's fooling around with your hormones. It's every month a disappointment. So after about a year or two of this, Liz said, I've got a great kid. Why am I making myself crazy? And stopped her treatments. And I continued with mine. And I did get pregnant. Rachel, she's here. And in those days, to find out the gender, you did an the only way to find out a gender was amniocentesis. And amniocentesis was only done when it was medically indicated. I was what they called an AMA, big red letters on all my charts, advanced maternal age. So the good thing was that I had amniocentesis. And it took a month, and I got the results that I was going to have a healthy, happy little girl. And my first call was to Liz to share my news, and she said to me, and I have news too. Oh, I'm pregnant too. How did that happen? Lucy had a birthday party one Sunday. Sorry, Brian. Rachel and Ken are 10 weeks apart, and it was fun. We had birthday parties that we shared, and zoos and sleepovers and museums and travel. But after Ken was born, Liz's job got moved to Summit, so the O'Byrnes moved to Millburn. Our weekends were a lot less frequent, but they were still as wonderful. Lucy met Jeff. The two families went to dinner in Manhattan to check him out. You passed. It's okay, it's okay. But Liz and I spent the dinner dropping little hints, because we had to make sure he wasn't a Republican. He passed, and we congratulated Lucy and welcomed Jeff. You're in. February 2012, another cold night, but not nearly as cold. A bunch of us went to hear a friend perform at B.B. King's in Manhattan. And as soon as the room quieted down, Liz announced that she had an announcement. We were all quiet. I'm going to be a grandma. Liz didn't say, Lucy's pregnant. She didn't say, Lucy and Jeff are going to have a baby. She said, I'm going to be a grandma. And that's how important grandmotherhood was to Liz. Every conversation we had, and we had a lot, we talked about Patrick and then Carter and sweet Maeve. Hi, Maeve. Tastes good? Good. We talked about politics, we talked about our families, and we talked about the world situation. And when Donald Trump was elected, we prepared a Chinese dinner together, but this time we did not smoke in the house. As her strength was ebbing at the end, Liz wanted to talk. In her last days, she texted me over and over. Unfortunately, it was often gibberish. And she called. If she didn't drop the phone, we would talk very briefly. One night she called Rachel, trying to reach me. As Rabbi Hillel taught, a joy shared is twice the joy. A sorrow shared is half the sorrow. Liz, thank you for making my joys more than double and my sorrows a lot less than half. Thank you for the lessons you taught me, and thank you for the many lessons we learned together. Liz, I don't want our bond to go out either. You fill my heart, and your heart continues to beat in me and in your wonderful family, and it beats in all who love you.
Thank you, Helen. There are so many stories of Liz that are wonderful and worthy of sharing. And if we had weeks to gather here together, I'm confident we could fill the hours with more and more stories. Here are just a few more to share that continue to reflect the beauty, the generosity, the commitment, and the life of Liz. Religious education, or RE, as it's called in-house sometimes, was very, very important to Liz. Reverend Emily shared with me that Liz became a member of Beacon, then called the Unitarian Church in Summit, when we had 2 locations. The adults gathered for worship in the sanctuary where we are now, and the children and their teachers, along with Reverend Carol Haig, the Minister of Religious Education then, gathered at Unitarian House, a large Victorian house about a block, a very long block away. In 2002, Beacon renovated the sanctuary and added on classrooms so that we could be under one roof. However, Liz shared with me that she wasn't used to being in the sanctuary. As she was always teaching her children's classes, she felt her spiritual home was there at Unitarian House. Reverend Carol Haig is deeply saddened not to be here with us today. She is with her family on retreat at Murray Grove. She was especially supportive, Reverend Haig recalls, of Liz, of my beginning ministry at Summit. She described a top-notch professional chemist and a loving and caring mother of Lucy and Kenny. Liz, writes Reverend Haig, was a strong supporter of and participant in the RE program during my tenure there. When we decided to go to 2 services, Liz immediately volunteered to lead the second service group. I still remember her explaining the inherent worth and dignity of each person by explaining it means in here, in my heart. She was always a warm friend and fun to be with. I will miss her. Beacon members Nancy and Bill Griffith share another story of those RE times. We met Liz when we were teaching our children's RE class in the old RE building up the street. She was such a cheerful person and a pleasure to work with. Later, a group of us, including Liz, prepared little lessons and demonstrations for evening sessions at Harmony House, where families struggling with housing lived while they were in transition. Liz presented a fascinating lesson on the importance of clean water to our civilization and how it's necessary for our health and well-being. Years later, she did a more detailed and technical reprise of her lesson on the importance of clean water and how it works for the humanist group at Beacon. We will miss her, they conclude. Jeannie Siegel is very sorry not to be able to be here, as her daughter, also named Elizabeth, is having her baby shower today. One memory, writes Jeannie, of Liz I have is from this sleepover that we had at Unitarian House when all the classes were still held there. Kenny is Elizabeth's age, and both were in class. Because the kids were all about 5 or 6, a parent was asked to stay with them.
and I still remember Kenny and Liz cuddling together and falling asleep. It was so sweet. Now, Ari was not the only commitment that Liz had here at Beacon. Marty Rothfelder shares, I had the pleasure of serving with Liz on Reverend Vanessa's search committee, on the board, and on social justice issues. She was a great, consistent partner in the work, always proceeding with civility and calmness. She talked with justifiable pride of her hands-on work for racial justice issues in the South. Dr. Tooley shares with us that Liz was on the board when you came to Beacon. Liz was always warm and welcoming. She was on the Women's Alliance, instrumental in organizing our annual board retreat in Mendham. Liz and Dr. Tooley would often meet at the YWCA, the Connection, and share a good laugh about how difficult the underwater class had been that day. Her bright blue eyes and charming smile and ability to include were inspirational. Mia Morris shares, when I first joined Beacon many years ago, I decided to join the Racial Justice Task Force. Along with Bill Foley, Art Perkins, Mel Polachek, and Jean Crichton, was our dear Liz O'Byrne. She welcomed me with open arms and was my beacon of light and hope as we grappled to address racial justice issues within our walls and beyond. I would show up to our meetings and say to myself, who is this white woman that's so animated and truly fighting for people that look like me? It was Liz. A fierce and fiery stalwart for equality and racial justice for all. Thank you, Liz, for being my Beacon sister, shining a light in the darkness, being our sweet salve and bearing witness to my pain, standing with me, embracing me with warm hugs, love, and compassion. I will forever carry you with me because you always gave so much of yourself. And in recalling an email from you this morning, I heard your voice and smiled because I know you shouted, yes, when Jean asked you to pour the lemonade for folks at our first Juneteenth celebration here in 2012. You're the wind beneath my wings, the core part of me, and my why to soldier on and fight for justice for all, no matter what. Unless we forget her generosity and cooking and donation to our annual fundraiser, Jean Crichton shares, I do fondly remember her Scottish dinner that she offered at the services auction with the haggis and other quintessential Scottish foods. It was a Burns Night dinner in 2011. I think it was held a few days after official Burns Night, January 25th, birth date of the Scottish national poet Bobby Burns, born in 1759. Also, it was at Liz and her husband's interesting house going up the hill in the middle of Milburn. The menu included haggis, a savory pudding that combines lamb liver and kidney, barley, and onions cooked traditionally in the sheep's stomach, but today in sausage casings. As I recall, it tastes a bit like Philadelphia scrapple. I remember Liz saying that she had bought the haggis and some of the other Scottish dishes at Stewart's Scottish Market in Kearney. We also had neeps and tatties, mashed turnips and potatoes, bridies, meat pies made with Angus beef sausage meat with onions, and as I recall, shortbread and other cookies for dessert. Who's hungry now? And undoubtedly, Jean recalls, more than one wee dram of Scotch whiskey. As is traditional for Burns Night, poetry was read, including the Selkirk Grace and then Burns' poem, addressed to the haggis, a salute in gratitude for a common person's dish of lamb. The grace goes like this in English. I'm glad, Jean, you didn't share it in any other language. Some have meat but cannot eat. Some have none that want it. But we have meat and we can eat. So let the Lord be thanked. The last time I talked to Liz, concludes Jean, when I phoned about her donating a recipe to our Beacon cookbook and learned that the family was moving to Canada. Because of that, I was able to say goodbye. She recalled the Burns dinner, confessing that her Scottish cooking had been finding a Scottish grocery, boiling the haggis, and heating the meat pies. Her trifle, she said, was from the Bird's custard tin. Her contribution to the cookbook was Irish soda bread clipped out of the Gannett Westchester newspaper when we lived in Terrytown, circa 1976. Happy St. Patrick's Day, or any time, she remarked, adding, "We have found a lovely UU congregation in Ottawa." Carol Conger Miller also attended those dinners and writes that, "I remember it included something from her Southern roots. It was my first and only time eating boiled peanuts and haggis." Carol was also in the same covenant group as Liz was for a few years, and she shares that she was always impressed by her thoughtful insights. I enjoyed her company, and her grandson was such a delight. Would you pause with me now for a moment? Take in a breath or two and let this spirit of life that so clearly inhabited Liz, let that spirit of life be in your being right now. In the midst of our grief and sorrow, we give thanks. We give thanks for a life well lived, with kindness, with commitment, with clarity of what is right and good, with the courage to live these truths. With generosity, with humor and adventure, and always love. Take a moment now to recall Liz in your mind and heart. Remember the celebrations, the parties, the rituals, the ordinary days. The RE meetings, classes, work shared, life shared. Yes, even that haggis. Recall the dinners, gatherings at a table. Remember Liz now. Thank you, Liz. Thank you for sharing your light with us. With this gratitude, beloved, know that as long as we live, as long as we remember, we share the stories and the rituals, and even more than this, when we live with kindness, this commitment, when we seek out adventure, when we gather together once more at the table. Liz O'Byrne, beloved, you are with us then. Blessed were we to know you. Blessed we are to call your name in memory. Blessed will we be for living your legacy. Amen.
Our closing refrain, We Remember Her, is by Sylvan Kemmons and Rabbi Jack Reimer. You are invited to respond, We remember her, after each sentence. At the rising sun and its going down, we remember her. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember her. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember her. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, at the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember her. at the beginning of the year and when it ends.
We remember.
When we are weary and in need of strength.
We remember.
When we are lost and sick at heart.
We remember.
When we have decisions that are difficult to make.
We remember.
When we have joy which we crave to share.
We remember.
When we have achievements that are based on her.
We remember.
For as long as we live, she too will live, for she is now a part of us as.
We remember her. We take Liz's life into our hearts and we keep it there. While today we extinguish this candle, she lives on in us. Her legacy is with us each and every day, and we will carry that out into the world so everyone knows Liz O'Byrne.